Hey everyone, I'm Adam Haritan, and in this video we're going to discuss 9 wild edible mushrooms that you could forage during the spring months. Now some of these mushrooms can actually be found during the summer months, some of these mushrooms can be found during the autumn months, and a few of these hardy species can actually be found growing during the winter months. So you don't just have to limit your search to the spring season when locating some of these mushrooms, but it is spring right now and there's a lot to see. So as you could probably tell, the snow has finally melted, the wood frogs have laid their eggs, the spring wildflowers are blooming, and of course some of our earliest spring fungal species are here. Needless to say, I absolutely love exploring the woods and forests and floodplains this time of year because there's just so much to see, there's so much to learn, and there's so much to appreciate and to be grateful for. To celebrate, I thought I'd share with you a brief list of wild edible spring mushrooms that you're likely to encounter, especially if you live in Eastern North America. So keep that in mind as we work our way through this list. Because I live in Eastern North America, because I'm most familiar with the species that grow in Eastern North America, it only makes sense that I feature Eastern North American species in this particular video. Also keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive list by any means. There are a lot of wild edible mushrooms that grow during the spring months, not just the ones featured in this video. So there is a chance that I might be leaving out one of your favorite mushroom species, and I hope you're okay with that. Now before we get started, I just want to go over some general points for you to keep in mind as we work our way through this list to ensure that your harvests are safe, successful, and fun. First, keep in mind that when I say that a mushroom is edible, I mean it's edible when cooked. None of these mushrooms in this video should be consumed raw. Every species in this video that is edible should be cooked first. Also, just because a species is listed as edible, that doesn't mean it's edible for everyone. Some people just can't tolerate certain edible mushrooms. Even choice edible mushrooms like morel mushrooms, when cooked, can make people sick. To reduce the chances that you would experience any gastrointestinal distress upon consuming a mushroom that's edible, if it's your first time consuming a particular wild mushroom, start small and cook very well. Lastly, consider reciprocity. If you're harvesting lots of mushrooms from the wild, consider reciprocating the action. Pick up trash, pull and eat invasives, plant native plants, give away native plants, teach others the joys of hanging out in nature, and consider giving in return for all that you've been given and are constantly given. The more we reciprocate, the better our local landscape will be for everyone, non-humans included. Now one last thing before we continue. I'm excited to say that I'm putting the final touches on the upcoming online mushroom foraging course that I've been incessantly and diligently working on for the past 2 years. This course is designed to guide you through all the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, and help you successfully and confidently forage wild mushrooms. This course is presented in video format with supplemental materials along the way, and all the videos and materials are organized and curated specifically to build your knowledge and skill set around the fungal kingdom. By taking this course, you'll have access to over 65 brand new full-length videos that cover mushroom ecology, mushroom biology, mushroom taxonomy, common edible mushrooms, poisonous mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, how to make medicinal mushroom extractions, cooking techniques, and a lot more. Now, registration for this course will be open in early May, and registration will only be open for a limited amount of time. If you are interested in taking this course to gain the knowledge to successfully and confidently forage wild edible mushrooms, you can visit learnyourland.com/course to join the waitlist. Once you join the list, you'll be notified when registration opens. So, having said all that, let's discuss 9 wild edible mushrooms that you're likely to encounter during the spring season. Alright, so of course we're going to start out with the morel mushroom because I don't think there's any other mushroom that is as highly valued and sought out during the spring season, especially here in Eastern North America, as the morel mushroom. Now to be clear, there are a lot of morel mushroom species worldwide with estimates of up to 60 species in that Morchella genus worldwide and around 19 or so species here in Eastern North America. Now conveniently, the morel mushrooms can be broken down into 3 main groups which are mycologically known as clades. So there's the black morel clade, which is the Elata clade. There's the yellow morel clade, which is the Esculenta clade. Then there's the Rufobrunia clade. Here in Eastern North America, we only have the black and yellow clades. And if you're from Pittsburgh, then you can really appreciate that. So right now we're going to go over a couple morel mushroom species, starting with an eastern black morel mushroom known as Morchella angusticeps. This morel mushroom is typically one of the first species to appear, and it's very easy to positively identify. So Morchella angusticeps, the eastern black morel, is a medium-sized morel mushroom with a conical, honeycomb pitted cap. This cap typically contains vertically oriented pits and ridges. And what's unique about the eastern black morel is that its ridges are darkened, especially at maturity, and the pits that are in between those ridges are somewhat lighter in color. Another key feature of the eastern black morel is that when you look at a cross section of the mushroom by cutting it in half, you will see that it's entirely hollow from top to bottom. So from the cap all the way to the base of the stem, this mushroom is hollow. And if you look closely, you'll see that the cap is fully attached to the stalk. However, there is a small groove or sinus, typically right where the base of the cap meets the stem. These are all key features for Morchella angusticeps. Now, where do we find the eastern black morel mushroom? Well, personally, I tend to find Morchella angusticeps under ash trees, under black cherry trees, and under tulip poplar trees. And depending on where you live, you can typically find this species during the weeks of March through April. Now, another member of the black morel clade, or the elata clade, is the half-free morel, Morchella punctipes. Now, many people don't value this species as highly as other morel mushroom species, though the half-free morel is a true morel mushroom, and it is edible, and it shares many features with other morel mushrooms, especially with other black morel mushrooms. So the half-free morel, Morchella punctipes, typically appears after the eastern black morel, though a little before the yellow morels appear. So you'll see it in March, you'll see it in April, even into May. The half-free morel is a medium-sized species that grows up to 6 inches or taller, and like other members of the black morel clade, the half-free morel typically contains a conical cap with vertically oriented pits and ridges, and these ridges darken at maturity. Now, when you cut the half-free morel in half, it is entirely hollow from the top of the cap all the way to the base of the stem. And a key feature of this species is that the bottom of the cap hangs free from the stem. The cap is not fully attached to the stalk. The top half of it is, but the bottom half hangs free like a skirt. And of course, this is why Morchella punctipes is known as the half-free morel. So, where do we find the half-free morel in eastern North America? Personally, I have the most luck finding it under ash trees, under tulip poplar trees, under American elm trees, and under black cherry trees. And the last morel mushroom species that we'll feature in this video is the common yellow morel, Morchella americana. So we're moving out of the elata clade into the esculenta clade. Now, this particular species, Morchella americana, the common yellow morel, typically appears after the black morels appear and after the half-free morels appear, though there is some overlap in season between all three species. The common yellow morel, Morchella americana, is a medium-sized morel mushroom that can actually grow to be quite large, up to 10 inches tall or greater. Morchella americana contains a cap that is typically less conical than black morel mushrooms, though like other true morels, the yellow morel contains a honeycomb pitted cap with pits and ridges. However, the ridges of this species do not darken at maturity, so that's a key difference between this mushroom and the eastern black morel mushroom. When you cut the common yellow morel in half, you will see that it's entirely hollow from top to bottom. Another key feature of Morchella americana is that its cap is entirely connected to the stalk with no groove or sinus, so it doesn't hang free at all. It is entirely connected to the stalk. Now, where do we find Morchella americana? Well, there are a lot of trees that this mushroom grows in association with. Personally, I tend to see this species under dying and dead elm trees, under apple trees, and under tulip poplar trees, though you'll also see it under ash trees, under sycamore trees, under pine trees, and some other trees. So here are all three species next to each other so that you can see their similarities and differences. If you're interested in finding morels, I strongly encourage you to learn your trees, because morels grow in association with a variety of trees. If you're interested in learning how to identify morel-associated trees, I do have a video on morel mushroom tree identification that you can also check out. Now, morels tend to appear when the soil consistently reaches temperatures between 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and they'll continue to fruit as the temperatures increase. To improve your chances of finding morels early in the season, you may want to check south-facing areas and slopes first, as those tend to warm up before the other areas do. And of course, morels like rain, so make it a point to explore prime morel habitats after some good spring rains. Lastly, if you want to eat morels, definitely cook them first. I know I mentioned the importance of this earlier, but it is especially important when talking about morel mushrooms, because morels contain toxins that are largely destroyed through the cooking process. Next, let's move on to another common edible spring mushroom known as Dryad Saddle, also known as pheasant back. And the Latin name of this beautiful species is Cereoporus squamosus. Now, Dryad Saddle isn't exclusively a spring mushroom. It can also be found during the summer months. It can also be found during the fall months, though spring seems to be its most prolific season, at least here in eastern North America. So Dryad Saddle is also known as the consolation prize for morel mushrooms, because if you don't find morel mushrooms, well, then you'll probably find some Dryad Saddle, because it tends to grow in similar habitats. And I tend to find Dryad Saddle decomposing elm trees. However, Dryad Saddle, or pheasantback, isn't typically valued as a choice edible mushroom, though it is edible and it's incredibly easy to positively identify. So when we take a look at its genus name, we are already given some key information regarding its fertile surface. Cereoporus means honeycombed pores. And that's exactly what we see when we look at the underside of Dryad Saddle. Keep this in mind because you do not see gills or teeth on the underside. Dryad Saddle is a true polypore mushroom, with lots of tiny pores from where its white spores are dispersed. Now, Dryad Saddle is a rather large mushroom that can grow up to 12 inches across or more, and its cap contains very distinctive dark brown scales. And this is where its species name comes from. Squamosus means scaly. Now, Dryad Saddle grows directly on wood, so you don't want to look around the forest floor for this mushroom. You want to look directly on trees. And I seem to find Dryad Saddle most frequently on dead elm trees. Another key feature of Dryad Saddle is its smell. Put your nose up to it, and it should smell like cucumber or watermelon rind. Not too many mushrooms smell like this, but Dryad Saddle does. Regarding edibility, in my experiences, the younger specimens are the best for eating, and usually the youngest mushrooms will be the smallest ones that you'll find. As the mushrooms mature, they become very tough and leathery, though you can oftentimes still salvage their outer margins and consume these thin margins after cooking. Also, you could dehydrate even mature specimens, then powder them and use the dried mushrooms as seasoning for soups and stews and other dishes. Next, let's move on to our first gilled fungus of the day. This one is none other than the winecap mushroom, Stropharia rugoso annulata. This is another spring favorite amongst mushroom enthusiasts. Now, unlike many of the other species on this list, the winecap mushroom doesn't necessarily demand a good hunt, because you could typically find it in suburban and urban landscapes, typically in mulched beds, in garden beds, and in wood chips. So don't think you have to go too deep into the wilderness to find the winecap mushroom. Many times it's just growing in your neighborhood, maybe even in your backyard. Now, the winecap mushroom is easy to cultivate and is one of the most popular mushrooms that is cultivated commercially worldwide. So the winecap, which is also known as the garden giant and king Stropharia, is a medium to large sized mushroom that can grow up to dinner plate proportions. The cap of this mushroom is wine red or burgundy colored, especially in younger mushrooms, though the cap fades to a straw or tannish color with age. Underneath the cap, you will see a fertile surface comprised of gills, but before you even see the gills, you may see a partial veil that covers the gills in immature mushrooms. When the cap expands, the partial veil breaks to leave a rugged ring around the stem. So look for all those features: a partial veil that covers the immature gills and a prominent grooved ring around the stem of more mature specimens. The gills of the winecap are whitish at first, then they become grayish and eventually purplish black. This latter color reflects the color of the spores, which, when mature, are dark purple-brown blackish. Now, the winecap mushroom is edible, though it tends to act as an insect motel, and it gets really buggy with age. So before cooking and consuming, make sure to check for insects. And also keep in mind the quality of the habitat from where you'll be harvesting winecaps. If the mulched beds are chemically treated or sprayed with toxic chemicals, consider foraging somewhere safer and saner. Next, let's talk about oyster mushrooms. And like winecap mushrooms, oyster mushrooms are edible, they're delicious, and they're easy to cultivate. Now, there are a lot of oyster mushrooms in that Pleurotus genus, too many to cover in this one video. There are estimates of between 40 to 200 species within that Pleurotus genus. So the one species that we're going to cover in this video is an oyster mushroom that really likes the cooler temperatures of the spring months. Now, you can also find this oyster mushroom during the autumn months and during the winter season, so long as temperatures are mild. So, Pleurotus austriatus is the common oyster mushroom, and as I just mentioned, one of its key features is that it prefers to grow during the cooler months of the year, so autumn through winter and even through early spring. If you're finding an oyster mushroom during the summer months in eastern North America, there's a good chance you're looking at a different species entirely. So the common oyster mushroom is a decomposer of wood, meaning you'll always find it growing directly on wood, usually in shelf-like clusters. If you see the species growing terrestrially, it's still fruiting from wood, though the wood is buried. So the common oyster is a medium to large size mushroom with caps that are whitish, tannish to light brown in color. Underneath the cap, you'll see a fertile surface comprised of whitish gills that are decurrent, meaning these gills run the complete length of the cap and even down the stalk, if the stalk is present. The spore print of this mushroom is pale lilac to whitish, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a delicious wild edible mushroom with the added benefit that you can often find it growing in abundance. So no surprise, it's one of my favorite wild edible mushrooms to forage, especially during the spring months, and I'm sure you'll enjoy foraging it too. Okay, the next mushroom on the list might come as a surprise because many people might not consider it to be a spring mushroom, though I assure you this mushroom does start to appear in May, at least here in Pennsylvania, and it continues to fruit during the summer months into mid to late autumn. So which edible mushroom am I talking about? How about the 80-mile-per-hour fungus, chicken of the woods, also known as the chicken mushroom, which is a member of the Laetoporus genus. So chicken of the woods is one of the easiest mushrooms to positively identify, and it's one of the easiest mushrooms to see in the woods because nothing is as large and as vibrantly colored as chicken of the woods. Now it's important to keep in mind that not everybody tolerates a meal made from chicken of the woods, even if it's cooked well. So if it's your first time cooking and consuming chicken of the woods, definitely start small and cook very well. The first Laetoporus species we'll discuss is Laetoporus sulphureus, which is also known as sulfur shelf. This is a medium to large size polypore mushroom that grows in overlapping clusters or as a rosette on deciduous wood. Its cap color is bright orange to yellowish orange, sometimes with a bright yellow margin, though with age the cap will fade and turn whitish and will become very crumbly. However, if you find chicken of the woods at this stage, check that spot again in a few months or next year because this mushroom tends to fruit multiple times from the same substrate. As I already mentioned, Laetoporus sulphureus is a polypore mushroom, so when you look at its underside, you will see a fertile surface comprised of lots of closely spaced tiny pores. You do not see gills, you do not see teeth or any other kind of fertile surface. You see pores and lots of them. In this particular species, Laetoporus sulphureus, the pore surface is bright yellow when fresh, though this color will fade with age. The spore print produced by this mushroom is white. The next chicken of the woods species I'll briefly discuss is one that also appears during the spring months, and it will continue to fruit summer through autumn. This one is Laetoporus cincinnatus, and it's another white-spored, woody decomposer that shares a lot of similarities with Laetoporus sulphureus. However, there are some big differences that will help you positively differentiate between the two species. Laetoporus cincinnatus is paler in color, almost a pale orange to pinkish orange color. So it isn't as bright orange or yellow as Laetoporus sulphureus. Also, on the underside, Laetoporus cincinnatus has pores that are peachish white in color. Remember, Laetoporus sulphureus has pores that are bright yellow. Another key feature of Laetoporus cincinnatus is that it typically fruits in a rosette pattern, either at the base of a tree or even a few feet away from a tree. It doesn't typically develop overlapping shelf-like clusters up and down a tree. Remember, Laetoporus sulphureus typically fruits in shelf-like clusters directly on wood. Regardless, Laetoporus cincinnatus is edible, and I usually prefer it, at least culinarily speaking, to Laetoporus sulphureus. Let's move on to and finish the list with Micacap mushrooms. And these fungi are incredibly interesting in that their caps and gills auto-digest and turn into a black inky goo with age. And the mycological term used to describe this phenomenon is deliquescence. Now, there are a lot of Micacap mushrooms that are taxonomically spread out over a few families and many genera. And because many of the species in these genera and families don't turn into a black inky goo with age, they don't deliquesce, the term Micacap may be less preferred than the word coprinoid to describe all these fungi. However, the species that I'm about to discuss, it is edible, it does turn into black inky goo with age, it does deliquesce, and so it is appropriate to refer to it as an Micacap mushroom. So this species is commonly known as the Micacap mushroom, and the most frequently used Latin name to describe this species is Coprinellus micaceus. Now, I just want to throw it out there for those who are interested in these kinds of things that there are at least 4 species that all look identical to the naked eye. And to determine which species you actually have, you may need to perform some microscopic analysis. Fortunately, though, all 4 species are edible, so if you find a Micacap mushroom, regardless of its true identity, according to mycologists and purists, you can consider it to be a mushroom that is edible. So the Micacap is a small edible mushroom that grows in large clusters on and around stumps and logs, oftentimes from buried wood, in urban and suburban landscapes. Typically the wood is derived from a broadleaf tree species, so cherry, oak, maple, or ash, and Micacap mushrooms can actually be found during all 4 seasons, not just during the spring months. However, there seems to be a strong resurgence of this species during the spring months, so that's why I'm including it in this list. Now the Micacap mushroom is very unique because its cap typically contains many fine granules when it is young and fresh. However, these mica-like granules may wash off in the rain or disappear with age entirely. The fertile surface of this species contains gills that, no surprise, partially deliquesce with age. In other words, these gills will liquefy, decompose, and turn into an inky goo. And of course, you want to harvest and cook these mushrooms before they deliquesce. The spore print produced by the Micacap is black. Now, despite what you might read, the Micacap mushroom does not contain the chemical compound coprine that is responsible for making people sick if they would happen to ingest the mushroom with alcohol. So, if you ever hear that some ink cap mushrooms can make you sick if you ingest them in conjunction with alcohol, that's true, but it's not true with the Micacap. Some other ink cap mushrooms contain coprine, and those species could make you quite ill if you would consume them with alcohol. However, this one, the Micacap, does not contain coprine. So there you have it, 9 edible fungi that grow during the spring season. Now some of the species on the list are very particular in their growing requirements. So you're going to have to put in the work to learn the tree associations and soil and temperature preferences. Other species on the list are less picky about their requirements and they can be found with much more ease. Meaning even if you just walk through the woods or walk around the block a few times a week during the spring season, chances are that you'll find at least a few of the species on the list without putting in too much extra effort. However, I always encourage you to put in extra effort because, as is true with many good things in life, extra effort equates to extra special rewards. So I hope you learned something through our hanging out this afternoon. And remember, if you're interested in learning more about the upcoming online mushroom foraging course, you'll want to head on over to learnyourland.com/course and join the waitlist. Thanks again. I truly appreciate it. Happy spring mushroom foraging. The mushrooms are telling me that spring is finally here. It's sunny, it's warm, it's my favorite time of the year. We're gonna find morels, and when we do we'll put them in a sack. But we can't get too off track. If it happens, that's okay, 'cause hey, look, there's pheasant back.